Listen, I need to tell you something that might sting a little. Most people are walking around thinking they're building their future when they're actually burning it down, one small choice at a time. And the cruelest part? They have no idea it's happening. I'm Benjamin Franklin, and I've watched this pattern destroy more lives than war or disease ever could. I've seen brilliant minds waste away. I've seen promising young people turn into bitter old souls who blame the world for problems they created themselves. And I've made enough mistakes in my own life to speak on this with painful clarity. Here's what nobody wants to hear. The comfortable lies you tell yourself today, the small compromises you make when nobody's watching, the discipline you skip because you're tired, the truth you avoid because it's inconvenient. These aren't just minor setbacks, they're termites eating away at the foundation of everything you hope to become. And the most dangerous part? It feels fine. It feels completely normal. You're not doing anything dramatically wrong. You're just scrolling a little longer than you planned. Just skipping one workout. Just avoiding one difficult conversation. Just staying in that job you hate for one more year. Just lying to yourself one more time about starting tomorrow. But here's what I learned after 70+ years of watching people succeed and fail, including myself. Your future isn't destroyed by the one big catastrophic decision. It's destroyed by 1,000 tiny moments where you chose comfort over character, where you chose easy over excellent, where you chose distraction over discipline. And the tragedy is that you won't notice it happening. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not for years. You'll wake up one day, maybe at 35, maybe at 50, maybe at 65, and suddenly realize that the life you're living bears no resemblance to the life you dreamed about. And you'll ask yourself how it happened. You'll search for someone to blame. But the uncomfortable truth is that it happened one unremarkable Tuesday at a time. I'm going to show you exactly how this destruction happens. I'm going to walk you through the invisible ways you sabotage yourself, and then I'm going to give you the tools to stop it. Because I've been on both sides of this equation. I've wasted years of my life on nonsense, and I've also built things that lasted centuries beyond my death. I know what works and what doesn't. And I know that if you're watching this right now, some part of you already suspects you're drifting off course. So let me ask you this. If your future self could travel back to this exact moment and whisper one warning in your ear, what do you think they'd say? What would they beg you to stop doing? What would they plead with you to start? Because that voice you're hearing right now, that little whisper of discomfort as you read these words, that's not anxiety. That's not negativity. That's your soul trying to get your attention before it's too late. Now, I want to make something clear before we go any further. This isn't going to be some feel-good motivational speech where I tell you that you're perfect just the way you are and everything will work out if you just believe in yourself. That's nonsense, and we both know it. The truth is harder than that, and more useful. You're not perfect. I wasn't perfect. Nobody is. We're all walking contradictions, capable of brilliance and stupidity in the same afternoon. But the difference between people who build extraordinary lives and people who sleepwalk through existence comes down to one thing: self-awareness, followed by action. Most people never develop real self-awareness. They go through life reacting to circumstances, making excuses, and blaming external factors for internal failures. They're like ships without rudders, blown around by whatever wind happens to be strongest that day. And then they wonder why they end up somewhere they never wanted to go. But you can be different. You can choose differently. Starting right now, in this moment, you can decide to stop lying to yourself about what's really happening in your life. You can decide to face the uncomfortable truths you've been avoiding. You can decide to build instead of drift. And I'm going to show you how. Because this isn't theory for me. I was a runaway at 17 with almost no formal education. I had every excuse in the world to fail. But I made different choices than most people make. Not because I was smarter or more talented, but because I was brutally honest with myself about what behaviors led to success and what behaviors led to mediocrity. I watched people closely. I studied patterns. I experimented with my own life like it were a laboratory. And I discovered something that changed everything. The small decisions you make when nobody's watching determine everything about the life you'll live when everyone is watching. Your private choices create your public results. Your invisible habits shape your visible destiny. Who you are in the dark determines who you become in the light. And right now, in the privacy of your own life, you're making choices that are either building your future or destroying it. There's no neutral. There's no pause button. Every moment, You're either moving toward the person you want to become or away from them. Every action is a vote for the type of person you are. And right now, if you're being honest, what are your actions voting for? Think about yesterday. Really think about it. How did you spend your time? What did you consume? What did you create? What did you learn? What difficult thing did you avoid? What easy thing did you indulge in? What conversation did you need to have but didn't? What work did you need to do but postponed? What person did you need to be but weren't? Those aren't judgment questions. They're awareness questions. Because you cannot change what you will not confront. You cannot fix what you will not face. And most people are so busy keeping themselves distracted that they never stop long enough to honestly assess where they're actually going versus where they claim they want to go. Here's what I know after a lifetime of observation. People don't fail because they aim too high and miss. They fail because they aim too low and hit. They fail because they never really aim at all. They just wake up every day and react to whatever comes at them. They live in response mode instead of creation mode. They become extras in someone else's movie instead of being the author of their own story. And the saddest part is that it doesn't have to be this way. You have more control than you think, more power than you're using, more potential than you're accessing. But accessing it requires something most people won't do. It requires you to get deeply uncomfortable. It requires you to look at your life with ruthless honesty and acknowledge all the ways you're betraying your own potential. That's where we're going in this conversation. Into the uncomfortable places, into the truth you've been avoiding, into the patterns you've been repeating without examining. And yes, it might hurt a little. Growth usually does. But I promise you this, the temporary discomfort of self-awareness is nothing compared to the permanent pain of wasted potential. So here's my question for you, and I want you to really sit with it. What version of yourself are you becoming? Not what version do you wish you were, not what version you present on social media. What version are your actual daily choices creating? Because that version is coming. That person is being built right now. With every choice you make, every habit you repeat, every standard you lower, every compromise you accept. Your future isn't some distant abstract concept. It's being constructed in this moment, and this moment, and this moment. You're always building something. The only question is, are you building something you'll be proud to inhabit? Or are you building a prison you'll spend the rest of your life trying to escape from? Let me tell you how I learned this lesson, because I learned it the hard way. When I was young, I thought I was smarter than everyone else. I thought I could cut corners, take shortcuts, and skip the difficult work that discipline demanded. I thought rules were for other people. I thought consequences were optional. And you know what happened? I wasted years. Years I can never get back. Years that could have been spent mastering my craft, deepening my knowledge, building real relationships, creating things of value. Instead, I chased pleasure. I chased distraction. I chased easily. And easy has a price that only shows up later, with interest. Because while I was choosing easy, other people were choosing difficult. While I was choosing comfort, they were choosing growth. While I was choosing now, they were choosing later. And eventually their later became their now, and they had built something real. Meanwhile, I had built nothing but excuses and regrets. That was the moment I changed. Not when I felt motivated, not when I felt inspired, but when I felt disgusted with myself. When I looked at my life honestly and didn't like what I saw. When the gap between who I was and who I wanted to be became so painful that staying the same hurt more than changing. That's when transformation became possible. And I want to save you some of that pain if I can. I want to help you see the patterns before they cost you years of your life. The beautiful thing about being human is that we can learn from other people's mistakes. We don't have to touch every hot stove ourselves. We can observe, learn, and choose differently. That's what I did once I woke up. I studied successful people obsessively. I looked at what they did differently. Not what they said, what they actually did. And I found patterns that changed my entire life. Let me share those patterns with you now. Let me show you exactly how people slowly destroy their futures without realizing it, and more importantly, how to stop doing it. Because awareness without action is just entertainment. And you didn't come here to be entertained. You came here because some part of you knows you're capable of more than you're currently producing. Some part of you is tired of your own excuses. Some part of you is ready to stop drifting and start building. So let's begin with the first and most dangerous way people destroy their future. They mistake activity for progress. They confuse motion with direction. They're incredibly busy going nowhere. I see this everywhere I look. People running around, constantly stressed, always occupied, never still. And at the end of the year, when they look back, they've moved very little toward anything that actually matters to them. They answered 1,000 emails but didn't write the book. They attended 100 meetings but didn't build the skill. They scrolled through 10,000 posts but didn't create anything of value. They were busy, exhausted even, but they made no meaningful progress toward the life they actually want to live. This is the trap of false productivity. It feels like you're doing something. Your calendar is full. Your to-do list is long. You're tired at the end of the day. So you tell yourself you worked hard. But did you work on what matters? Did you move toward your actual goals? Or did you just respond to other people's priorities? Did you just fill time with tasks that feel urgent but aren't important? There's a crucial difference between urgent and important that most people never learn. Urgent things demand immediate attention. They're usually someone else's problem that becomes your crisis. The phone is ringing, the email that just arrived, the meeting with someone else, the request that someone else made. These things feel urgent, so we respond to them immediately. And we spend our entire day in response mode, reacting to everyone else's needs while our own dreams sit untouched. Important things, on the other hand, are rarely urgent. They don't scream at you. They don't demand immediate attention. They're the things that, if you did them consistently, would transform your life. Writing that book, building that business, learning that skill, having that difficult conversation, investing in that relationship, taking care of your health. These things are important, but because they're not urgent, they get postponed. Day after day, week after week, year after year, until one day you wake up and realize that you spent your entire life dealing with urgent things and never got around to important things. This is how futures get destroyed. Not through dramatic failure, but through quiet postponement. Through choosing urgent over important so many times that important never happens. And the cruelest part is that it feels responsible. It feels productive. You can point to all the things you did. You were so busy. How can anyone fault you for being busy? But busy doing what? Busy building whose dream? Busy serving whose vision? If it's not yours, then you're destroying your future, one productive day at a time. I learned to ask myself a simple question that changed everything. If I could only do 3 things today, what 3 things would move me closest to the life I'm trying to build? Not what needs to be done. Not what other people want from me. Not what would make me look busy. What 3 things would actually move the needle toward my real goals? And here's the discipline. I did those 3 things first. Before email, before meetings, before anything else. I protected the important from the tyranny of the urgent. And my life changed completely. Because when you do the important things consistently, compound interest takes over. Small progress accumulates. Skills deepen. Work improves. Results appear. But you have to protect that time like your life depends on it. Because it does. Most people never do this. They let everyone else set their agenda. They respond to whoever yells the loudest. They check their email first thing in the morning and spend their whole day putting out fires that wouldn't exist if they'd just planned properly in the first place. You know what the difference is? The difference is ownership. Successful people own their time. They guard it like I guarded my printing press. Because that's what time is. It's your means of production. It's the only asset you can never get back, never borrow more of, never replace. I used to watch people in Philadelphia waste hours every day on meaningless social calls. They'd wander from coffee house to coffee house, gossiping about nothing, complaining about their circumstances, and wondering why opportunity never knocked on their door. Meanwhile, I was in my shop at 5 in the morning, typesetting pages, running calculations, drafting proposals. They thought I was lucky. Lucky. As if success just falls from the sky like rain. Let me tell you something about luck. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. And preparation requires time. Focused, intentional, protected time. Here's what I did that changed everything. I created what I called my daily scheme. Every single day was mapped out, hour by hour. Not because I was rigid or obsessive, but because I understood something fundamental. If you don't decide how your day will go, someone else will decide for you. 5 a.m. to 8 a.m. Reading, writing, planning my day, and personal improvement. That was sacred, non-negotiable. The world didn't even know I existed during those hours, and that's exactly how I wanted it. 8 a.m. to noon, work, real work, the kind that moves the needle. Not busy work, not answering correspondence, not meetings about meetings. I was producing, creating, building. Noon to 2 p.m., reading, reviewing accounts, eating. This is when I'd handle the mail, deal with interruptions, and take care of the administrative debris that accumulates in any venture. 2 p.m. to 6 p.m., more focused work. By this point, I'd already accomplished more than most people do in a week. 6 p.m. onward, supper, music, conversation, reflection. I'd review my day, examine my conduct, and plan for tomorrow. Did I follow this perfectly every single day? Of course not. Life happens. Emergencies arise. But having the structure meant I knew exactly what I was sacrificing when something pulled me away. I could make conscious trade-offs instead of just drifting through my days like a leaf on a stream. And here's what nobody tells you about structure. It doesn't limit your freedom. It creates it. When you control your time, when you protect your peak hours, when you build systems that run without constant intervention, that's when you're actually free. The chaos, the constant firefighting, the feeling that you're always behind, that's not freedom. That's slavery with extra steps. And here's what kills me about all of this. Everyone thinks they want more time, but what they really want is more times energy asterisk. You could have all 24 hours in the day completely free, but if you're exhausted, irritable, and burnt out, what good does it do you? I learned this the hard way. There was a period when I was so focused on productivity that I stopped taking walks. I cut out my morning reading. I rushed through meals like they were just fuel stops. And you know what happened? My work got worse. My ideas dried up. I became this hollow machine that was technically producing but creating nothing of value. The human mind isn't designed for constant output. It needs white space. It needs moments where you're staring at the ceiling, where you're walking without a destination, where you're having a conversation that goes nowhere in particular. That's not wasted time, that's where the times real times thinking happens. But we've built a culture that punishes rest. If you're not grinding, if you're not hustling, if you're not posting about your productivity routine at 5 in the morning, you're lazy. You're falling behind. You're not serious about success. It's exhausting just thinking about it. And the worst part? This mindset bleeds into everything. You can't enjoy a vacation because you're worried about what's piling up. You can't watch a movie without checking your phone. You can't have dinner with friends without that nagging feeling that you should be somewhere else, doing something more productive. We've forgotten that humans aren't machines. We're biological creatures with needs that go beyond task completion. We need sleep times, real-time sleep, not this 4-hour hustle culture nonsense. We need a connection. We need to play. We need beauty and stillness, and moments where absolutely nothing is being optimized. The truly wealthy understand this. They don't brag about how busy they are. They brag about how much control they have over their time. They take long lunches. They turn off their phones. They disappear for weeks at a time. Meanwhile, everyone else is trapped in this performance of productivity, mistaking motion for progress. And here's what really stings. The system rewards the appearance of work over the work itself. I watch people climb corporate ladders because they've mastered the art of looking busy. They're first in, last out. Their calendars are a mosaic of back-to-back meetings. They respond to emails at midnight, on weekends, and during vacations. But what are they actually times producing asterisk? Strip away the theater, and you'll find something troubling. These aren't the people generating the breakthrough ideas. They're not the ones solving the impossible problems. They're maintenance workers in expensive suits, keeping the machine running while calling it innovation. The truly productive people? They're ghosts in the system. They work in bursts of intense, almost obsessive focus. They might disappear for 3 days, and when they resurface, they've solved what took everyone else 3 months to even understand. But because they don't perform productivity, because they don't send those late-night emails or attend every meeting, they're often overlooked for promotion. We've created a bizarre economy where attention has become the currency, and we're all bankrupt while pretending to be rich. You see it everywhere. The writer who posts about writing more than they actually write. The entrepreneur who's always grinding on social media but whose business hasn't grown in 2 years. The student who studies 12 hours a day but retains nothing because they're toggling between textbooks, phones, and streaming services. This isn't productivity. This is performance art. And the cost? It's not just wasted time. It's the erosion of our ability to do anything meaningful at all. When you fragment your attention across a dozen tasks, you lose more than efficiency. You lose depth. You lose the capacity for original thought. Deep work, real, sustained, focused work, is where breakthroughs happen. It's where you make connections nobody else sees. It's where you create something that matters. But deep work requires something our culture has declared obsolete: boredom. You need to sit with a problem long enough to get bored with the surface-level answers. You need space for your mind to wander into unexpected territory. The smartphone in your pocket is specifically engineered to prevent this boredom. Every algorithm is optimized to fill every micro-moment of potential emptiness. Waiting for coffee? Check your phone. In line at the grocery store? Scroll through feeds. Even sitting on the toilet has become content consumption time. We've eliminated the gaps. And those gaps were where the magic happened. I remember writing Poor Richard's Almanac during long winter evenings with nothing but candlelight and my own thoughts. Hours would pass where my only companion was the scratching of a quill on paper. My mind would drift, wander, circle back. Some of my best aphorisms came not from focused effort but from letting my thoughts meander like a river finding its path. Today, that kind of mental wandering is nearly extinct. We've trained ourselves to reach for stimulation the moment our thoughts slow down. Boredom has become something to be avoided at all costs, an enemy to be defeated with entertainment. But boredom is not your enemy. Boredom is the soil in which deep thinking grows. When you allow yourself to be bored with a problem, your mind stops reaching for easy answers. It starts making unexpected connections. It begins pulling from different domains of knowledge, combining ideas that seem unrelated. This is where innovation lives, not in the frantic consumption of information, but in the patient digestion of it. Newton developed his theory of gravity during a period of isolation from the plague. Darwin spent years on a ship with limited external stimulation before piecing together natural selection. Einstein worked as a patent clerk, spending long hours with his thoughts. Their breakthroughs didn't come from consuming more information. They came from having time to think deeply about what they already knew. You don't need more content. You need more boredom. You need to reclaim those gaps. Take walks without headphones. Sit in a chair and just think. Let yourself be understimulated for once. Your brain will resist at first. It's been conditioned to expect constant input. But if you push through that resistance, you'll discover something remarkable. Your mind is far more interesting than your feed. I remember sailing across the Atlantic weeks at sea, with nothing but sky, water, and my own thoughts. No notifications, no breaking news, no endless scroll, just silence and observation. And you know what? Those voyages produced some of my best thinking. The Gulf Stream didn't reveal itself to a distracted mind. It required sustained attention, pattern recognition across days of careful observation. Your ancestors knew this truth intimately. A hunter tracking deer through the forest couldn't afford a distraction, one wandering thought, and the trail went cold. A craftsman shaping wood into furniture needed hours of focused attention. Their survival depended on deep work, and their brains evolved to support it. Your brain has those same capabilities. It hasn't changed, but your environment has. Here's what happens when you reclaim boredom. First, you'll feel anxious. That's withdrawal. Your dopamine system is throwing a tantrum because it's not getting its expected hits. Sit with that discomfort. It passes. Then, something shifts. Your mind starts generating ideas instead of consuming them. You notice details you've been blind to for years, the way light falls through your window at 3 o'clock, the rhythm of your own breathing, the actual taste of your coffee instead of just the caffeine delivery system. Creativity isn't found, it's grown in the fertile soil of unstimulated time. The most dangerous myth of your era is that you need to stay informed about everything. You don't. Most of what floods your attention is either irrelevant to your actual life or completely outside your sphere of influence. I read one newspaper a week when I could get one, and I helped birth a nation. You read 500 headlines before breakfast and feel powerless. There's a reason for that. Constant information creates the illusion of action. Scrolling feels like doing something. It's not. It's the mental equivalent of junk food filling but not nourishing. Try this. One day a week, Consume no digital information. None. No news, no social media, no email. Just your immediate environment and the people in it. You'll be shocked by how little you miss and how much you gain. You see, I learned this lesson the hard way in Philadelphia. When I was publishing the Pennsylvania Gazette, I was drowning in information, political pamphlets, letters from Europe, local gossip, business correspondence. I thought consuming it all made me informed, but I was confusing noise with knowledge. The breakthrough came when I started my Sunday silence ritual. One day each week, I would retreat to my study with nothing but blank paper and my thoughts. No newspapers, no letters, just me and the problems I was actually trying to solve. That's when I invented the lightning rod. That's when I designed the Franklin stove. That's when I wrote Poor Richard's Almanac. The correlation wasn't coincidental. Creativity requires white space. Insight demands silence. You cannot hear the whisper of a good idea when you're surrounded by the screaming of 1,000 notifications. Here's what I want you to try this week. Create an information Sabbath. Pick one day, just one where you consume zero news, zero social feeds, zero external input. Instead, spend that day with direct experience. Walk in nature. Have real conversations. Read a book that's older than your parents. Work on something with your hands. You'll experience withdrawal at first. That's normal. Your brain has been trained to expect constant stimulation. But push through it. By evening, you'll notice something remarkable. Your thoughts become clearer. Your anxiety diminishes. Problems that seemed insurmountable suddenly have obvious solutions. Because here's the secret. Most of the information you consume isn't helping you. It's distracting you from the work that actually matters. Every minute spent scrolling through other people's curated highlights is a minute stolen from building your own meaningful life. Every article about distant crises you cannot influence is energy diverted from the local problems you can actually solve. I'm not advocating ignorance. I'm advocating discernment. There's a vast difference between being uninformed and being unburdened by irrelevance. The truly wise person doesn't know everything, they know what's worth knowing. So, guard your attention like the precious resource it is. Because attention isn't just how you spend your time. Attention is how you spend your life. And here's what I learned in those quiet hours before dawn. When the rest of Philadelphia slept, the mind is like a candle. You can scatter its light across 1,000 surfaces and see nothing clearly. Or you can focus it through a lens and set the world ablaze. I chose fire. Every morning at 5 o'clock, I asked myself a single question. What good shall I do today? Not 10 things. Not a vague sense of busyness. One question. One focal point. One North Star. To guide the ship of my day. You see, the undisciplined mind mistakes motion for progress. It confuses the frantic energy of distraction with the steady force of accomplishment. I watched men work themselves into exhaustion, flitting from task to task like moths around a lantern, only to collapse at day's end, having completed nothing of substance. The disciplined mind knows better. It understands that power comes not from doing everything but from doing the right thing, completely, deeply, without reservation or distraction. I applied this principle to everything. When I wrote, I wrote. When I experimented with electricity, I experimented. When I conversed, I conversed. I gave each activity the full treasury of my attention, knowing that a thing done with complete focus is worth 10 things done while distracted. This is why I could run a printing business, publish a newspaper, manage a bookstore, serve as postmaster, conduct scientific experiments, engage in politics, and still have time to improve my mind through reading. Not because I had more hours than you do, but because the hours I had were undivided. The amateur spreads himself thin. The professional goes deep. And depth, my friend, is where all treasure lies. Surface attention yields surface results. But when you dive beneath the waves, when you commit your full presence to a singular pursuit, you discover capabilities you never knew existed. You find solutions invisible to the scattered mind. You create work that stands the test of time. I see your world now, and I see brilliant minds squandered on shallow waters. Your potential does not come from lack of ability, but from lack of directed energy. I watched this in my own century. The brilliant conversationalist who never published. The gifted inventor who scattered his attention across 20 projects and completed none. History remembers neither their names nor their contributions. You have tools I could only dream of. Information that took me weeks to acquire through correspondence now appears before you in seconds. Yet this abundance has become your prison. You check your device not because you need information, but because the mechanism itself has hijacked your reward system. Let me be frank about what I observe. Your generation speaks endlessly of productivity while producing remarkably little of lasting value. You confuse motion with progress. You mistake consumption for creation. You have mistaken the feeling of being busy for the reality of meaningful work. I once worked on improving the efficiency of printing presses. The goal was never speed for its own sake. It was to spread knowledge, to make wisdom accessible, to elevate public discourse. Every efficiency served a higher purpose. What purpose does your efficiency serve when you process 100 emails but advance no significant project? The uncomfortable truth is this: most of what fills your day does not matter. In 5 years, no one will remember that email you agonized over. No one will care about that meeting that could have been a brief note. But they will remember the work you created when you finally claimed your time back from the thieves of attention. I see young people with the capacity for greatness, spending their mental energy on disputes with strangers, on content that evaporates from memory within hours, on maintaining a carefully curated fiction of their lives for an audience of people they barely know. This is not a connection. This is performance masquerading as a relationship. True connection requires presence. It requires the full weight of your attention. When I sat with members of the Junto, our philosophical club, we gave each other the gift of undivided focus. We debated ideas with intensity because we were fully there. We challenged each other because we respected each other enough to be genuinely present. I wonder what those young men who stare at their glowing screens during dinner would have made of our evenings. Would they understand the electricity? Yes, I use that word deliberately, that flowed between minds fully engaged. Not the electricity trapped in their devices, but the spark of human connection when two souls actually meet. The young generation speaks often of anxiety, of feeling overwhelmed, of mental exhaustion. They describe their minds as racing, their thoughts as scattered. They consume content about mindfulness and meditation, seeking peace. Yet they cannot see that they carry the source of their torment in their very pockets. I experimented extensively with electricity in my time. I learned that it must complete a circuit to function properly. The same is true of human attention. When you begin a task, your mind creates a circuit, a flow of energy and focus toward completion. Each interruption breaks that circuit. You must then expend additional energy to rebuild it, to return to the state of flow you had achieved. The modern worker, I'm told, is interrupted every few minutes. Their attention never completes its circuit. They spend their entire day rebuilding what was just broken, starting what can never be finished. Is it any wonder they feel exhausted despite accomplishing so little? They confuse motion with progress, busyness with productivity. I structured my days with what I called my scheme. I asked myself each morning, what good shall I do this day? Each task had its hour. I devoted solid blocks of time to reading, to writing, to business, to conversation. When the hour for work arrived, I worked. When the hour for leisure came, I rested fully. I did not mix them, did not dilute one with the other. This was not rigidity, it was liberation. By deciding in advance how my attention would be allocated, I freed myself from the tyranny of constant decision-making. I did not waste mental energy each moment choosing what to do next. The structure created space for depth. Consider the craftsman in his workshop. When he carves wood, he does not stop every few minutes to check if someone has sent him a message. He does not pause his chisel mid-stroke to see what others are doing. He enters into communion with his material. He listens to what the wood tells him. His attention and his hands work as one. This is how all meaningful work occurs, through sustained, unbroken attention. I have watched men in my print shop perform this same dance with metal type and wooden frames. When their minds wander to tomorrow's wages or yesterday's quarrels, the letters jumble, the impressions blur, the ink spreads unevenly across the page. But when they surrender completely to the task at hand, feeling the texture of each letter, sensing the pressure needed for each impression, listening to the rhythm of the press, they produce work that sings with clarity. The modern world mistakes speed for efficiency, but they are not the same creature. True efficiency emerges from complete absorption, not from hurried distraction. A man who checks his messages while drafting a document takes twice as long and produces half the quality as one who closes his door, silences his devices, and gives himself entirely to the writing. I learned this principle most painfully through failure. In my early years as a printer, I attempted to manage the press while simultaneously discussing business with customers, planning future publications, and instructing apprentices. I believed this made me productive. Instead, I produced inferior work, frustrated my customers, confused my apprentices, and exhausted myself thoroughly. The press bore witness to my divided attention through smudged pages and crooked lines. The turning point came when I observed a Quaker craftsman who refused all interruption during his work hours. His workshop had no windows facing the street. He did not engage in conversation while at his bench. Some called him rude or unsociable. Yet his furniture was sought after throughout the colonies, and he completed commissions faster than workshops with twice as many hands. I asked him his secret. He looked at me with mild surprise, as if the answer were self-evident. "I do one thing at a time," he said. "And while I do that one thing, I do nothing else whatsoever." This wisdom, simple as warm bread, transformed my entire enterprise. I established what I called cathedral hours, periods of absolute sanctuary for focused work. During these hours, I was unavailable to all but the most urgent emergencies. No casual visitors, no idle conversation, no switching between tasks. Just myself and the work, merged in a singular purpose. The results astonished me. Projects that previously dragged across weeks are now concluded in days. The quality of my output improved so dramatically that customers began paying premium rates without negotiation. But here's what nobody tells you about productivity systems: they have an expiration date. What works brilliantly for 3 months suddenly stops working in month 4. The planner that changed your life becomes another dusty notebook on your shelf. The app you couldn't live without now sends notifications you habitually ignore. I became obsessed with understanding why this happens. Why do productivity systems decay? And more importantly, how do you build something that actually lasts? The answer surprised me. It wasn't about finding the perfect system. It was about accepting that no system is perfect, and building adaptability into the very foundation of how you work. Think about it like physical exercise. You don't do the same workout routine for 10 years straight and expect continuous improvement. Your body adapts. You hit plateaus. You need to introduce variation, increase intensity, and change the stimulus entirely. Your productivity system needs the same evolutionary approach. So I started treating my productivity methods as experiments rather than commandments. Each system got a 3-month trial period. During that time, I tracked specific metrics, not just tasks completed, but energy levels, creative output quality, and most importantly, how I felt at the end of each day. Some experiments failed spectacularly. I once tried working in 90-minute sprints with 30-minute breaks, based on research about ultradian rhythms. Sounds great in theory. In practice, I spent those 30-minute breaks anxiously thinking about the next sprint, which defeated the entire purpose of rest. Other experiments revealed hidden truths about how I actually work. I discovered that my peak creative hours weren't in the morning like all the productivity gurus claimed. My brain came alive between 2 p.m. and 6 p.m. That 4-hour window produced better work than the other 12 hours combined. This realization forced me to restructure everything. Instead of fighting my natural rhythms with discipline and willpower, I designed my entire day around protecting those 4 golden hours. Meetings got pushed to mornings. Administrative work happened in the evening. And those afternoon hours became sacred. No interruptions. No exceptions. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was undeniable. Within 6 weeks, I was producing in 20 hours per week what previously required 50. Not because I worked harder, but because I finally stopped working against myself. The mathematics of this shift revealed something I'd never considered. If you work 50 hours weekly at 50% cognitive efficiency due to sleep deprivation, you're generating 25 hours of genuine output. But if you work 20 hours weekly at 90% efficiency through proper rest, you're producing 18 hours of true productivity, nearly the same output, but you've reclaimed 30 hours of your life and eliminated the crushing exhaustion that makes existence feel like punishment. I started noticing subtler benefits that the productivity gurus never mentioned. My decision-making improved dramatically. Where I previously deliberated for hours over minor choices, creating decision fatigue that cascaded through my entire day, I now make clear calls within minutes. My well-rested brain could distinguish important decisions requiring careful thought from trivial ones deserving instant resolution. My relationships transformed. I'd been so depleted that interactions with my partner felt like obligations I had to endure rather than connections I wanted to nurture. I'd been emotionally absent, physically present, but mentally elsewhere, running calculations about work deadlines during dinner conversations. With adequate sleep, I rediscovered the capacity for presence. I could actually listen instead of just waiting for my turn to speak while my exhausted mind wandered. The emotional regulation was perhaps most striking. You don't realize how fragile sleep deprivation makes you until you experience the alternative. Things that previously sent me into spirals of anxiety, a critical email, an unexpected expense, a minor conflict I could now process with perspective. My emotional bandwidth expanded. I had room for complexity, for nuance, for resilience. Here's what the hustle culture missionaries don't tell you. Your body keeps score. Every short night is a loan against your future performance, and the interest compounds mercilessly. You might maintain the illusion of productivity for weeks, even months, but eventually the bill comes due. For me, it came as a complete cognitive collapse. For others, it arrives as illness, burnout, or catastrophic errors in judgment. The tragic irony is that we sacrifice sleep to gain time, only to waste the waking hours we've stolen on diminished cognition and fractured focus. The mathematics of sleep deprivation follows a merciless logic that compounds with each passing night. After just 17 hours of sustained wakefulness, your cognitive performance declines to the equivalent of someone with a blood alcohol content of 0.05%. Push to 24 hours without sleep, and you've reached 0.1% legally drunk by most standards. Yet we routinely ask ourselves and others to function in this impaired state. I've watched colleagues pride themselves on running on 4 or 5 hours of sleep, as though denying basic biology were somehow admirable. They stumble through meetings with vacant stares, miss obvious details, and make decisions they'll later regret, all while congratulating themselves on their work ethic. It's not dedication, it's delusion masquerading as determination. The research on sleep and decision-making reveals something particularly unsettling for those of us who value sound judgment. When sleep-deprived, the prefrontal cortex, that seat of reason and executive function I so valued, essentially goes offline. Your brain becomes less able to integrate information, consider consequences, or resist impulses. You're not thinking clearly. You're operating on autopilot with faulty instruments. Studies show that sleep-deprived individuals become optimistic about risky decisions and pessimistic about their ability to perform well on challenging tasks. This combination is catastrophic. We simultaneously overestimate the potential gains of poor choices while underestimating our capacity to handle difficult but necessary work. We gamble when we should be cautious, and we retreat when we should persevere. The damage extends beyond the individual. Sleep deprivation degrades our social cognition, our ability to read emotional cues, empathize with others, and regulate our own emotional responses. Relationships suffer, teams fracture. The very collaboration that might salvage our failing projects becomes impossible because we've sacrificed the neural resources required for human connection on the altar of productivity. Here's what haunts me most. We know all this. The science isn't hidden or controversial, yet we've constructed a culture that systematically ignores it. We celebrate the entrepreneur who sleeps 4 hours a night as a visionary. We romanticize the hustle culture that treats rest as laziness. We've turned exhaustion into a badge of honor, a social currency that signals dedication and worth. I watch my grandchildren scroll through social media at midnight, their faces bathed in blue light, and I think about how we've weaponized technology against our own biology. Every notification is an assault on sleep pressure. Every infinite scroll is a deliberate hijacking of our natural wind-down process. The irony cuts deep. We live in the most technologically advanced civilization in human history, with more knowledge about sleep at our fingertips than ever existed in all the libraries of my time combined. Yet we sleep worse than medieval peasants who had nothing but candlelight and common sense. Those peasants went to bed when darkness fell because they had no choice. They woke with the sun because their bodies demanded it. They weren't smarter than us, they simply hadn't yet invented ways to torture themselves. We've engineered a world that's fundamentally incompatible with the way human beings are built. Our bodies are still running on firmware that's tens of thousands of years old, designed for a world without electric lights, without smartphones, without the expectation that we should be productive and available 24 hours a day. And here's what really gets me. We treat the consequences of sleep deprivation as individual moral failures, rather than systemic design flaws. Does your child struggle in school? Must be lazy. You're gaining weight? Lack of willpower. Can't focus at work? Not trying hard enough. We pathologize the predictable outcomes of biological abuse. Meanwhile, sleep deprivation is celebrated as a badge of honor. I'll sleep when I'm dead, they say, not realizing they're accelerating the timeline. We worship the hustle, glorify the grind, lionize those who boast about 4-hour nights as if destroying your body's most fundamental recovery process makes you superior rather than simply reckless. Your brain literally shrinks without adequate sleep. The glymphatic system, your neural waste disposal, only functions properly during deep rest. Skip that, and you're essentially letting toxic proteins accumulate in your brain tissue, like garbage, piling up during a sanitation strike. Yet we structure society to punish sleep. Early school start times that contradict adolescent biology, shift work that rotates against circadian rhythms, and workplace cultures where staying late signals commitment rather than poor time management. And the light. Good God, the light pollution we've inflicted upon ourselves. For millions of years, your ancestors' days ended when the sun set. Fire provided some evening illumination, sure, but nothing compared to the retina-searing brightness of modern LED screens. Your pineal gland doesn't know what to do. With blue light at midnight, it thinks the sun's still up, suppresses melatonin accordingly, and leaves you staring at the ceiling at 2 in the morning, wondering why you can't sleep after 6 hours of scrolling through other people's highlight reels. We're diurnal creatures living increasingly nocturnal lifestyles, then wondering why depression rates keep climbing. The correlation between artificial light exposure at night and mood disorders isn't subtle. It's screaming at us from the data, but we collectively shrug and buy blackout curtains as a band-aid while keeping our phones on the nightstand. Speaking of those phones, let's address the elephant with the glowing screen in the room. The constant connectivity, the perpetual availability, the fact that you're never truly alone with your thoughts anymore because there's always another notification, another update, another crisis demanding your immediate attention. Human brains didn't evolve for this. You're wired for a tribe of about 150 people, not intimate awareness of global catastrophes in real time. Every ping triggers a cortisol response. And the most insidious part? Social media companies know this. They've hired neuroscientists, behavioral psychologists, and teams of people whose entire job is to make these platforms as addictive as possible. They study dopamine hits like I studied electrical currents methodically, scientifically, with the express purpose of manipulation. There's a reason why you can scroll for 2 hours and have no memory of what you actually saw. That's not an accident. That's called an infinite scroll, deliberately designed to eliminate stopping cues. In my day, when you finished reading a newspaper, you were done. There was an endpoint. Today, the feed never ends. There's always one more video, one more post, one more story. I ran the Pennsylvania Gazette. I knew how to capture attention, but I also knew when to let people go. These platforms? They're designed to hold you hostage. The algorithm learns what makes you angry, what makes you anxious, what keeps you watching, and then it feeds you more of exactly that. You think you're choosing what to watch? You're not. You're being fed. Like a lab rat, pressing a lever for intermittent rewards, never knowing when the next dopamine hit will come, so you just keep pressing, keep scrolling, keep watching. And here's what terrifies me. An entire generation is growing up with their attention spans carved into pieces so small they can barely hold a thought. You wonder why focus feels impossible? Why does reading a book feel like climbing a mountain? Your brain has been trained for 7-second clips and instant gratification. I spent hours, days thinking through single paragraphs. That depth of thought, that patience with complexity, is becoming extinct. And when a society loses the ability to think deeply, to follow an argument from premise to conclusion, to sit with uncertainty and nuance, what you get is exactly what we're seeing now. Polarization, rage, simplification of every issue into tribal warfare. Because deep thinking requires time and attention. Shallow thinking thrives in the chaos of constant distraction. It's easier to react than to reflect, faster to share than to understand. So no, your brain isn't broken. It's been hijacked. And the first step to reclaiming it is recognizing you're in a battle for your own attention, a battle designed by people who profit from your distraction. Continuing seamlessly. Here's what makes this particularly insidious. They've turned your desire for connection into a weapon against you. Every notification that vibrates in your pocket is engineered to trigger a micro hit of dopamine. Every pull to refresh gesture mimics the psychology of a slot machine. This isn't an accident, it's millions of dollars in behavioral research weaponized against your prefrontal cortex. I spoke with a former engineer from one of these companies who told me something chilling. He said, "We had a metric called time well spent, but it never made it into our performance reviews. What mattered was daily active users and session length. We celebrated when those numbers went up, even when we knew people were losing sleep, missing moments with their kids, feeling worse about themselves." Let that sink in. The people building these tools know exactly what they're doing. They've studied B.F. Skinner's work on variable rewards. They understand that unpredictability, not knowing whether you'll get a like, a message, or nothing, creates stronger compulsion than consistent rewards. A pigeon pecking a lever for food will tap more frantically when rewards come randomly. You, scrolling through your feed at 2 a.m., are running the same maze. And here's the cruelest part. They've convinced you that the solution is just more willpower. That if you can't resist, you're weak. But you're not fighting a fair fight. You're a human being with finite cognitive resources going up against artificial intelligence designed specifically to exploit your psychological vulnerabilities. It's like blaming someone for drowning when you've tied weights to their ankles. The truth? Willpower is a depletable resource. Every decision you make, every temptation you resist, depletes it slightly. And these platforms know this. They've designed their systems to wear you down, to catch you in moments of weakness when you're tired, lonely, bored, or stressed. That's not a flaw in the design. That's the design working exactly as intended. And here's what truly disturbs me about this design. It weaponizes our virtues against us. Your desire to stay informed becomes anxiety. Your wish to connect becomes isolation. Your aspiration to be productive becomes paralyzed. They've taken the very impulses that might elevate us and engineered them into chains. I often think of a young woman I observed last year. Brilliant mind, working on important research. She'd set limits, downloaded apps to block distractions, and tried every strategy. Yet somehow, she'd still find herself 3 hours deep into content she didn't even enjoy, feeling worse than when she started. The shame in her voice when she described it, "I just lack self-control." That's exactly what they want you to think. Because if you believe it's your personal failing, you won't question the system. You won't demand better. You'll just keep trying harder, keep blaming yourself, keep coming back for another attempt, generating more data, more engagement, more profit for platforms that have invested billions in making sure you fail. Let me be crystal clear. These platforms employ thousands of engineers, psychologists, and designers whose entire job is to keep you scrolling. They run hundreds of thousands of experiments to find exactly which shade of red makes you click, which notification timing breaks your focus most effectively, and which content sequence keeps you longest. They have more resources dedicated to capturing your attention than you have to defending it. And then they dare to call it a level playing field. This isn't about willpower. This is about warfare. And you're fighting with a wooden sword against opponents with machine guns, acting surprised when you don't win. The addiction economy doesn't just want your time. It wants your potential. Every hour you spend in the shallow end of the pool is an hour you're not swimming in the deep end. Every moment given to reactive scrolling is stolen from proactive creating. And the tragedy is that most people don't even realize what they've lost until years have passed and they look back, wondering where their time went. I learned this truth not in Philadelphia, but in Paris. When I served as ambassador to France, I found myself suddenly thrust into a world of endless social obligations. Dinner parties, salons, court appearances, each one demanding my presence, each host seemingly offended if I declined. And I confess, for a time, I got swept up in it. The flattery was intoxicating. The attention was seductive. But then, I noticed something alarming. Weeks would pass where I accomplished nothing of substance. I was busy, certainly. My calendar was full. Yet when I sat down to reflect on what I had actually created, what problems I had actually solved, what knowledge I had actually gained, the answer was disturbingly little. That's when I implemented what I called my diplomatic diet. Just as the body needs proper nutrition, not just constant eating, the mind needs proper stimulation, not just constant activity. I began declining invitations that didn't align with my mission. I carved out sacred morning hours for scientific correspondence. I protected my reading time as fiercely as a dragon guards its gold. The result? I negotiated the treaty that ended the Revolutionary War. I conducted groundbreaking experiments on ocean currents. I maintained friendships that enriched my soul rather than merely filled my schedule. You must do the same. Look at your calendar right now, not tomorrow, now, and ask yourself, how many of these commitments are investments, and how many are expenses? How many grow your capacity, and how many merely consume it? I'm not suggesting you become a hermit. Connection matters, community matters, but there's a vast difference between meaningful engagement and mindless consumption, between intentional presence and obligatory attendance. The powerful truth is this: every yes you speak is simultaneously a no to something else. When you say yes to scrolling through social media, you're saying no to reading that book. When you say yes to binge-watching another series, you're saying no to developing that skill. When you say yes to gossip and complaint, you're saying no to planning and action. Your attention is a non-renewable resource. Once spent, it's gone forever. You cannot get back the hours you've given to things that don't matter. There is no bank where you can withdraw the deposited amount. And yet, how carelessly we spend it. We waste hours in idle gossip, in mindless scrolling, in activities that bring us neither profit nor pleasure. We fritter away our days as if we had an infinite supply. I've watched people squander entire mornings debating trivial matters: who said what, who wore what, whose business is whose. Meanwhile, their own affairs lie neglected. Their own potential remains untapped. Their own time, their only true wealth, drains away like water through their fingers. Consider the man who complains he has no time to read, to learn, to better himself, yet observe him closely. You'll find him spending 2 hours at the tavern every evening. You'll catch him lounging about, waiting for something interesting to happen, rather than making it happen. He has time. He simply spends it poorly. Time is the coin of life. It is the only coin you have, and only you can determine how it will be spent. Be careful, lest others spend it for you. I learned early in life to guard my time as jealously as a miser guards his gold. I created systems, routines, rituals, all designed to wring maximum value from each day. My daily schedule, which I shared with the world, was not a suggestion. It was a sacred contract with myself. Every morning I asked, what good shall I do this day? Every evening I asked, what good have I done today? These simple questions anchored my use of time to purpose. They prevented drift. They demanded accountability. But accountability to questions alone isn't enough. You must also learn to say no. This might be the most valuable skill you can develop in managing your time. Every yes to something is a no to something else. When you say yes to an unimportant meeting, you say no to important work. When you say yes to gossip, you say no to learning. When you say yes to distraction, you say no to progress. I was often called unsociable because I declined invitations that would consume my time without providing value. I was called obsessive because I adhered strictly to my schedule. Let them talk. While they wasted breath criticizing, I was improving my mind, growing my business, and serving my community. The tragedy is that most people don't realize what they're losing until it's too late. They reach the end of their lives and suddenly understand. All that mattered was how they spent their time. The relationships they built or neglected, the work they completed or avoided, the person they became or failed to become. Time is the substance from which life is made. Waste your time, and you waste your life. Master your time, and you master your life. But mastering time means more than just productivity. It means understanding what truly deserves your hours. I learned this the hard way in Philadelphia. During those years when I was building everything at once: my printing business, the library, the fire company, my electrical experiments, I thought I had to say yes to everything, attend every meeting, accept every invitation. One evening, a merchant invited me to a social gathering that would consume the better part of 3 hours. It was the kind of event where important men gathered, where connections were made, and where my absence might be noticed. The old part of me wanted to go, to be seen, to be included. But I had promised myself that evening to work on my experiments with electricity. I had questions burning in my mind that needed answers. So I declined the invitation. The merchant looked at me as if I'd insulted him. "You're turning down an opportunity to network with the city's finest?" he asked, incredulous. I smiled and said, I'm not turning down an opportunity. I'm choosing a different one. Every yes to something is a no to something else. Tonight, I'm saying yes to discovery. That evening, in my workshop, changed the course of my life more than any social gathering ever could. It was the night I began to understand the true nature of electrical charge, insights that would eventually lead to my experiments with lightning. Here's what I want you to understand. Your time is not democratic. Not every hour deserves equal weight. Not every request deserves your yes. Not every opportunity is truly an opportunity. The world will constantly try to claim pieces of your day. People will ask for just a minute, which becomes 20. Obligations will pile up like unread correspondence. Distractions will multiply like rabbits in springtime. Your job is not to do everything. It's to do the right things. And how do you know what the right things are? Ask yourself this question. The same one I ask myself every morning for decades. What is the most important thing I can do today that will move my life forward? Not the most urgent thing. Not the loudest thing demanding attention. Not the thing everyone else expects. The most important thing, because once you identify that one thing, that keystone priority that holds everything else in place, the chaos begins to settle. The noise doesn't disappear, but it loses its power over you. I learned this lesson painfully during the Constitutional Convention. We had 13 states, each with its own interests, its own fears, its own vision of what America should become. Every delegate arrived with a list of demands they considered essential. The arguments were fierce. The room was often tense with competing priorities. But we had to ask ourselves constantly, what is the most important thing right here, right now? Not what would make Virginia happy, or what would satisfy Massachusetts. Not what sounded impressive or what would win applause. What was the one thing that, if we failed to achieve it, would make everything else irrelevant? The answer was the Union itself. Without a framework that kept us together, all our brilliant ideas about rights and representation meant nothing. That became our North Star. When debates spiraled into chaos, we returned to that question: does this proposal strengthen the Union or weaken it? And here's what happened: something remarkable. Once we aligned around that central priority, the secondary questions became easier to resolve. Not easy, mind you, but easier. We had a standard to measure proposals against. We had a shared definition of success. This is what happens when you identify your most important thing. It becomes a filter. 1,000 opportunities cross your path, and instead of agonizing over each one, you simply ask, does this serve my most important thing, or does it distract from it? Most of those opportunities, you'll discover, are distractions wearing disguises. They look important, they feel urgent, they come recommended by people you respect, but when measured against your true priority, they reveal themselves as detours. And you can say no without guilt, not because you're lazy or uncommitted, but because you're fiercely committed to something that matters more. This is the freedom that comes from clarity. You stop trying to do everything and start doing the right thing. You stop spreading yourself thin and start going deep. You stop reacting to every demand on your attention and start acting according to your own design. The most important thing isn't always the most exciting thing. It's often the most difficult thing. The thing you've been avoiding because it requires something from you that you're not sure you can give. And here's what nobody tells you about that difficult thing: it gets easier once you start. Not because the task itself becomes simpler, but because times become stronger. Every time you choose the important over the easy, you're building a different kind of muscle. A muscle most people never even know they have. I've watched this transformation happen countless times. The person who dreaded making cold calls suddenly realizes they're not just selling, they're solving problems for people who need help. The student who avoided math homework discovers that struggle itself is a form of growth. The parent who procrastinates difficult conversations with their teenager finds that honesty creates connection, not distance. The resistance you feel isn't a wall, it's a doorway. And on the other side of that doorway is a version of yourself you haven't met yet. Let me tell you about something I call the clarity gap. It's the space between knowing what you should do and actually doing it. Most people live their entire lives in this gap. They know they should exercise. They know they should save money. They know they should tell people they love them while they still can. But knowing doesn't translate to doing. Why? Because closing the clarity gap requires you to tolerate discomfort in the present moment for the sake of a future self you can barely imagine. It requires faith, not religious faith necessarily, but faith that your actions matter, that small choices compound, that the person you're becoming is worth the temporary pain of change. Here's the truth that changed everything for me. Asterisk. Your future self is watching you right now. Asterisk. I know that sounds strange, but think about it. 5 years from now, you'll look back at this moment. You'll remember the choices you made today, and you'll either feel gratitude or regret. That future version of you is either thanking you or shaking their head in disappointment. Which one do you want it to be? This isn't about perfection. I'm not suggesting you need to optimize every moment or turn into some productivity robot. I'm talking about those handful of critical decisions each day that genuinely matter. The ones you know in your gut are important even when your mind tries to talk you out of them. Here's what I discovered about those critical decisions. They're rarely the ones that feel dramatic in the moment. They're the quiet choices nobody applauds. Deciding to have the difficult conversation instead of avoiding it. Choosing to document your process when nobody's watching. Taking an extra hour to do something right, instead of just getting it done. I remember working on a printing project that was, by all accounts, perfectly acceptable. The customer would have been satisfied. The deadline was approaching. But there was this nagging feeling that one section could be clearer, more useful. The easy choice was to send it as is. The important choice was to spend another evening refining it. That extra effort led to the customer showing it to a business partner, who became a client, who introduced me to someone who became crucial to my later publishing ventures. None of that was predictable. But the principle was, when quality matters to you, it eventually matters to everyone. The modern version of this looks like the developer who comments their code thoroughly, even though it takes extra time. The teacher who personalizes feedback instead of using generic responses. The manager who documents decisions and reasoning, creating institutional knowledge instead of institutional confusion. You're not doing these things because you'll definitely get rewarded. You're doing them because they compound who you become. Here's the paradox I had to accept. The decisions that matter most for your future success are often invisible to everyone evaluating your present performance. Your boss might not notice that you're building systems instead of just completing tasks. Your clients might not realize you're documenting solutions that will serve dozens of future situations. Your peers might not see that you're developing judgment through careful observation rather than just accumulating experiences. This invisibility is exactly why these decisions are so powerful. They're not performative. They're not optimized for immediate validation. They're optimized for the person you're building the capacity to become. Which brings me to the most controversial part of this entire conversation. You're going to have to disappoint people. Not because you're selfish, not because you're cruel, but because the path that makes your grandmother proud, your colleagues comfortable, and your social circle impressed, is probably not the path that aligns with who you're becoming. I've watched this play out 1,000 times. Someone starts making real progress. They start saying no to obligations that drain them. They start investing time in skills instead of social media. They start choosing the difficult growth over the comfortable plateau. And then the people around them get uncomfortable. Not angry. Not confrontational. Just disappointed. There's this subtle withdrawal. This quiet expectation that you'll explain yourself, justify your choices, prove that you haven't become arrogant or selfish or changed in some fundamental way. Here's what nobody tells you. That discomfort isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's often a sign you're doing something right. Because when you stop playing the role people assigned you, when you stop being available in the ways they've come to expect, when you stop deriving your worth from their approval, you're forcing them to confront their own choices. Your discipline becomes a mirror. Your progress becomes an accusation. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but simply by existing, you're demonstrating that change is possible, which means their stagnation is a choice. And that makes people deeply uncomfortable. I'm not saying abandon everyone who questions you. I'm not advocating for some cold, isolated pursuit of success at any cost. But I am saying this: if your primary motivation for any significant life decision is avoiding someone else's disappointment, you're not building a life. You're curating a performance. The people who genuinely love you will struggle with your changes and still support them. They'll be confused, maybe even threatened, but they'll ultimately respect that you're becoming more yourself, not less. The others? They loved the version of you that made them comfortable. And when that version evolves, their love reveals itself as something more conditional than either of you realized. This is painful, necessary, and absolutely unavoidable if you're serious about transformation. Because here's the truth that took me far too long to accept. You cannot outperform your way into unconditional acceptance. You cannot hustle hard enough. You cannot achieve enough. You cannot optimize yourself into a version that finally feels worthy of rest, of love, of simply existing without constantly proving something. I tried. God, how I tried. Every morning at 5 a.m. with that journal. Every productivity system. Every self-improvement framework. Every book that promised I could finally become enough disciplined, enough productive, enough valuable if I just applied the right methodology. And you know what happened? I got really good at doing, at producing, achieving, but I never got any closer to feeling like I could stop, because the goalposts kept moving. That's what happens when your worth is tied to your performance. There's always another level, always another person doing more, always evidence that you could be better, should be better, aren't quite there yet. The productivity culture we've built, and I was absolutely complicit in building it, it's not designed to help you arrive anywhere. It's designed to keep you running. Because a person who feels fundamentally okay, who believes they're already enough, that person isn't desperately consuming every course, every framework, every productivity app promising to finally make them acceptable. That person isn't profitable to the system. So here's what actually changed for me. And I'm going to be honest, this part is messy. It's not a clean framework. It's not 5 simple steps. It started with exhaustion. Not the kind of tired that a vacation fixes. The bone-deep, soul-level exhaustion that comes from running a race that has no finish line, from trying to earn something that was never actually for sale. I remember sitting in my car after a particularly successful workshop. People had loved it. The evaluations were glowing. I delivered exactly what I promised, maybe better. And I felt nothing. Just empty, just tired. That's when the question finally broke through. What am I actually running from? And let me tell you, that question terrified me more than any mountain ever could. Because I realized I'd been running from something that followed me up every peak, into every selfie, through every perfectly filtered moment. I'd been running from the possibility that, without the achievements, without the validation, without the constant proof of my exceptionalism, I might just be ordinary. And being ordinary felt like death. I started noticing it everywhere once I saw it in myself. My friends who couldn't enjoy a meal without photographing it from 6 angles. My colleague, who worked herself into exhaustion every quarter, not because she loved the work, but because she needed the performance review to tell her she mattered. My brother, who bought a car he couldn't afford because he needed people at stoplights to think he'd made it. We were all running the same race, just on different tracks. The philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote that all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. I used to think that was about boredom. Now, I understand it differently. We can't sit still, because sitting still means facing ourselves without the costume of accomplishment, without the noise, without the proof. I started experimenting with something radical, doing nothing. Not meditation, not self-care, not even rest for productivity. Just nothing. Sitting, existing, being present in my own skin without trying to improve it, document it, or prove anything about it. It was excruciating at first. My mind would race through every unfinished task, every person I needed to impress, every way I was falling behind. The discomfort was physical. My leg would bounce. My fingers would itch for my phone. I'd suddenly remember urgent emails that absolutely needed to be sent right that second. But gradually, something shifted. In the silence, I started hearing a different voice. Not the one that screamed about achievement and comparison. A quieter one. One that had been there all along, underneath the noise, patiently waiting. It asked different questions. Not, what can you accomplish? But, what brings you joy? Not, how do you compare? But, what feels true? Not, who are you impressing? But who are you becoming? And here's what that voice revealed. I'd spent decades building a life that looked impressive from the outside, while hollowing out everything that actually mattered on the inside. I'd optimized for appearance over experience, for validation of the connection, for achievement over meaning. I'd been building a monument to myself that I was too busy building to ever actually live in. And the cost? The cost was everything that actually mattered. I look at the photos from those years, and I barely recognize the man staring back. Not because I looked different, though I did, all hollow eyes and stress eating its way through my skin, but because I can see in that face how absent I was, how I'd convinced myself that being busy meant being alive. Here's what nobody tells you about success. It's a jealous lover. It wants all of you. Every hour, every thought, every ounce of energy you possess. And it promises that once you reach the next milestone, once you hit the next goal, asterisk, then times you can rest. Asterisk, then times you can reconnect. Asterisk, then times you can be present. But that then never comes. Because the goalposts move. They always move. I remember sitting in yet another hotel room, in yet another city, and my daughter called. She wanted to tell me about her day, about something funny that happened at school. And I was half listening, giving her those, and that's nice honey responses while scrolling through emails on my laptop. She knew. Kids always know. Dad, are you even listening? She asked. Of course I am, I lied. And then I couldn't remember a single thing she'd just said. There was this pause. This terrible, awful pause where I could feel her deciding something. Deciding that maybe it wasn't worth trying to reach me anymore. Deciding that her dad was physically present, but emotionally somewhere else. Always somewhere else. Never mind, she said. It's not important. But it was important. It was everything. And I'd just taught her that she wasn't as important as whatever was happening on my screen. That moment haunts me. Because it wasn't an isolated incident, it was a pattern. A pattern of choosing the urgent over the important, the professional over the personal, the impressive over the intimate. I experimented in my final years. I tracked how I spent every hour of every day, a habit I'd maintained since my 20s, but this time with different questions. Not was this productive, but will I remember this? Not did this advance my goals, but did this nourish my soul? The results devastated me. Roughly 70% of my time went to activities I couldn't even recall 3 days later. Meetings that produced nothing memorable. Correspondence that changed nothing. Hours spent on projects whose outcomes mattered to no one, least of all myself. Meanwhile, the moments I remembered with crystalline clarity: a Tuesday afternoon spent flying kites with neighborhood children, an evening arguing philosophy with a friend over wine that had gone slightly sour, the morning I spent sketching a new stove design purely for the joy of problem-solving, with no thought of profit or recognition. These weren't the achievements anyone would list in my obituary, but they were the experiences that made me feel most alive. Here's what I discovered. We remember what moves us emotionally, not what impresses us intellectually. We treasure the moments when we were fully present, not the ones where we were mentally rehearsing our next accomplishment. We cherish the times we connected authentically, not the occasions we performed successfully. I spent decades optimizing for the wrong metric. I measured my days by what I produced, not by what I experienced. By what I achieved, not by what I felt. By how others might judge my time, not by whether I actually wanted to live it. The cruel irony? The drive that made me successful also prevented me from enjoying that success. I was so focused on building a legacy that I forgot to build a life. So concerned with being remembered that I forgot to be present. In those final years, I tried to rebalance. I said no to more requests. I spent more time in simple conversation. I allowed myself to be unproductive, to waste time, to simply exist without purpose or agenda. It felt uncomfortable at first, almost guilty. But gradually, I discovered something remarkable. These unproductive moments produced a different kind of wealth. Not wealth anyone could inherit or measure, but wealth nonetheless. The wealth of peace, of presence, of actually inhabiting my own life instead of constantly racing past it. And therein lies the profound irony. I want you to understand the very thing we're told will make us successful, that relentless forward momentum, that refusal to pause, that's precisely what prevents us from experiencing the success we've already achieved. I watched a friend buy his dream home after years of sacrifice. Beautiful place. Everything he'd imagined. And you know what he said to me 3 days after moving in? I'm already thinking about the next upgrade. Not a moment of arrival. not a breath of satisfaction, just immediately recalibrating the treadmill to a steeper incline. That's when I realized we've been conditioned to mistake motion for progress, to confuse activity with accomplishment, to believe that being busy means being important, that being stressed means being needed, that being exhausted means being productive. But what if it's all backwards? What if the real measure of success isn't how much you can accumulate, but how little you need to feel complete? Not how many hours you can work, but how present you can be in the hours you live. Not how fast you can move, but how deeply you can rest. I started asking myself a different question. What would I do today if I already had everything I needed? And the answer surprised me. I wouldn't do anything dramatically different. I'd just do the same things with presence instead of panic, with intention instead of compulsion, with gratitude instead of grasping. The person who finally taught me this lesson wasn't some guru or philosopher. It was my grandmother, in her final days. I sat beside her bed, and she looked at me with those clear, knowing eyes and said, "Benjamin, I spent 50 years waiting for someday. Someday I'll relax. Someday I'll travel. Someday I'll be happy." You know what I learned? Someday is a place you never arrive at. It's always just beyond the next achievement, the next milestone, the next finish line that keeps moving. She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. The only day you ever have is the one you're living right now. And if you can't find peace in this moment, you won't find it in any future moment either. Because you'll bring the same restless mind with you wherever you go. Those words shattered something in me, some illusion I'd been carrying. I realized I'd been living like a man crossing a desert, always believing that the next oasis would be the one where I'd finally rest. But each time I arrived, I'd take one sip of water and immediately start scanning the horizon for the next destination. The present moment wasn't preparation for life. It was life itself. This changed everything about how I approached my days. Instead of rushing through breakfast while planning my morning, I tasted my food. Instead of reading while thinking about what I'd read next, I absorbed what was before me. Instead of talking to people while mentally drafting my next sentence, I listened. And here's what nobody tells you about presence. It doesn't just make life more pleasant. It makes you more effective at everything you do. When I was fully present in conversations, I understood people's true concerns, not just their words. When I was present while writing, my thoughts flowed with a clarity that multitasking never allowed. When I was present while working, I accomplished in 3 focused hours what used to take me an entire distracted day. The restless mind isn't productive. It's just busy. There's a profound difference. I started treating my attention like the limited resource it was. I had maybe 16 waking hours in a day, maybe 50 productive years left if I were fortunate. Every moment I spent half present was a moment I'd never get back. So I made a practice of it. Before starting any task, I'd pause and ask myself, am I here? 3 words. 5 seconds. It became my anchor. Am I here while eating this meal? Or am I somewhere else? Am I here while my friend is speaking? Or am I rehearsing my response? Am I here while walking down this street I've walked 1,000 times? Or am I sleepwalking through my own life? Most of the time, honestly, I wasn't there. But asking the question brought me back, and each time I returned to the present, I experienced something remarkable. I experienced reality. Not my thoughts about reality. Not my judgments or interpretations or anxieties about reality. Just what was actually happening. And what was actually happening was usually far less dramatic than what was happening in my head.